The sun peeks over the horizon, casting long shadows across a bustling marketplace. The air is thick with the smell of spices and fresh earth. Merchants shout their prices, their voices a chaotic symphony. Baskets of vibrant, colorful fruits are piled high on weathered wooden tables. Nearby, cloth traders haggle with farmers, their hands dancing in gestures of negotiation. Through this lively crowd, a young man walks with a determined stride. He's not carrying a purse heavy with gold or a pocket full of silver coins. Instead, he clutches a small leather pouch. And inside that pouch are seashells? Not just any shells. Small white polished cowrie shells. And on this day, these simple shells will buy him everything he needs. Food to fill his belly, new clothes for his family, and even tools for his trade. Because here, in this time and place, these seashells are money. How did a simple object from the ocean become a currency powerful enough to run an entire economy? These are cowrie shells, and for centuries, they were one of the most widely used forms of money in the world. They came from the warm, distant waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, particularly from the Maldive Islands. For people living far inland, in many parts of Africa, Asia, and even parts of Europe, these shells were exotic and rare, and as we know, rarity often creates value. But rarity alone isn't enough to make something money. Cowrie shells had other important qualities. They were small and light, making them easy to carry. They were durable, unlike leaves or grains that could rot. They were also remarkably uniform in size and shape, which made them easy to count. Most importantly, they were almost impossible to counterfeit. You couldn't just carve a shell out of wood or bake one in a kiln. You had to get it from the sea, so people began to trust them. A farmer would accept a handful of shells for a bushel of wheat. A blacksmith would trade a newly forged tool for a pouch of them. Markets began to standardize prices in cowries. Over time, this trust grew and spread. The shells weren't just a medium of exchange. They became a store of value and a unit of account. Cowrie shells had become real, legitimate currency. Imagine yourself standing in that marketplace, hundreds of years ago. You want to buy some rice? The merchant weighs a basket and tells you the price. 200 shells. You see a healthy-looking chicken clucking in a cage that'll be 500 shells. A laborer, after a long day's work under the sun, might earn a few dozen shells for his effort. Life revolved around these shells. People stored their wealth in large clay jars or woven baskets filled with cowries. Kings and chiefs collected them as taxes, amassing huge treasuries of shells. When it came time for major transactions, like paying a dowry or buying land, it could involve counting out tens of thousands of them. Traders who moved goods over long distances had to deal with massive quantities. They would pack shells into sacks and transport them by camel caravan or boat. Entire economic systems, spanning vast continents, were built on the foundation of these tiny objects from the sea. For generations, this system worked remarkably well. Trade flourished, markets expanded, and economies grew. Everything felt stable, predictable. The value of a shell was the value of a shell. Until one day, everything changed. Far across the ocean, European sailors and traders made a discovery that would ripple across the globe. They found the source of the cowrie shells, the Maldive Islands. And they didn't just find a few. They found beaches littered with them, lagoons filled with them, millions upon millions of shells, available for the taking. A light bulb went on. These traders realized they could collect these shells for virtually nothing, load them onto their massive ships, and sail them to the markets in West Africa where they were highly valued. It was the ultimate arbitrage opportunity. So the ships were loaded. Sacks of shells, then barrels of shells, until entire cargo holds were overflowing with what was essentially free money. When the first of these ships arrived at the African ports and began unloading their cargo, the local markets were flooded with an unprecedented number of cowrie shells. At first, people were probably thrilled. More money circulating meant trade was easier. It was suddenly simpler to make purchases, to pay workers, to conduct business. The economy felt like it was booming. But then, a strange and unsettling trend began to emerge. A merchant who sold rice for 200 shells, a basket, noticed that he was selling out too quickly. So he raised the price to 300. Soon that wasn't enough. The price rose to 400, then 600, then 1,000. It wasn't just rice. The price of everything started to climb. Chickens, cloth, tools, everything cost more and more shells. The shells themselves hadn't changed. They were the same size, the same shape, the same weight. But their value, their purchasing power, was collapsing. When the supply of money increases dramatically, but the supply of actual goods and services stays the same, each individual unit of that money becomes less valuable. It takes more money to buy the same thing. Today, we have a simple word for this phenomenon: inflation. The massive influx of European transported shells had triggered hyperinflation, devastating the economies that had depended on them for so long. This incredible story of the cowrie shell isn't just a quirky historical footnote. It reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of money itself. Money doesn't have value because of what it's made of. Gold isn't valuable just because it's a shiny metal. A dollar bill isn't valuable because the paper and ink are special. Money in any form only has value because we, as a society, collectively agree that it does. It's a system built entirely on trust and shared belief. Gold worked. Paper works. Digital numbers on a screen work. And for many centuries, seashells worked too. They were trusted, accepted, and stable. But the story also carries a timeless warning. Whenever the creation of money becomes too easy, whenever its supply can be expanded without limit, history shows us the same lesson, again and again. The trust erodes, and its value begins to disappear into thin air. So the next time you check your bank balance or pay for something with a tap of your card, take a moment to remember the cowrie shell. Long before we had digital banking, credit cards, or even paper bills, entire civilizations built their prosperity on nothing more than small, white shells from the sea. And just like today, everything worked perfectly. Until one day, there were simply too many shells. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more dives into the strange and wonderful corners of our history. See you next time.